Good evening, everyone. I'm Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive of the RSA. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here all for this evening. Well, this is great fun, isn't it? People normally kind of apologise for the fact they have to speak, to speak in this room. They kind of go, "Well, is my speech big enough for this room?" But of course, tonight that isn't a problem at all, because this room is the subject of what we're going to be talking about, and you're all sitting in circles, which is really nice, and you're all interested in this subject, which is fantastic, and you've all got yes, exactly, and you've all got a glass of wine, which makes things even better. The only person who hasn't got a glass of wine is Bill, so, but we'll give him one at the end, that's a promise. Okay. So just a quick reminder before we start, we're filming tonight's event, so could you switch your phones to silent? We're also live streaming over the RSA website, so welcome to all our online viewers. If you want to get involved in the discussion on Twitter, the hashtag is RSA murals. So, housekeeping notice is over. I'm delighted to formally introduce this evening's special event, focusing on the impressive murals which surround us in this room. The sequence of 6 paintings commissioned from the Irish artist James Barry, completed between 1777 and 1784. And I'm delighted to be welcoming our distinguished guest speaker, Professor William Bill Presley. Bill is Emeritus Professor of 18th and 19th century European art at the University of Maryland, and the life and works of James Barry forms a key area of his research. We are celebrating Bill's latest publication this evening, the sumptuous James Barry's Murals at the Royal Society of Art's Envisioning a New Public Art. The book is published by Cork University Press, and we would like to thank them for their kind assistance in planning and supporting this event. In his lecture this evening, Bill will talk about, he'll talk about this, of course, and what else would he talk about? He'll talk about James Barry's pioneering approach to public art in terms of the novelty of his patronage and the highly personal nature of his content. We'll hear from Bill. I mean, as you know from the book, Bill could stand and speak. I mean, he could do a whole term's lectures on this subject, but he's going to crush all of that into 25 minutes in order that there is time for me and for you to ask him some questions before we finish at 7 o'clock. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Bill Presley.
So thank you very much, Matthew, for that delightful introduction. And I also just want to take the opportunity to thank you and the staff here at the RSA for really over the years, the kind of support and generosity that's been shown toward me in my work has really been very impressive, and I'm most grateful. And I want to thank too Mike Collins and Maria O'Donovan of Cork University Press for the splendid job they did and the production of the book. And this sort of is a dream come true to be able to talk about the murals here beneath them. And this is the first time I've been in the room since the refit. And it's absolutely magnificent. I'm sure many of you remember that banked steps that went down, and the orientation was here on the east wall. And the original orientation, you entered here, and the president was here. And so this gets back closer to the appearance of the room after it was first built. And I also, in sort of setting up this introduction to our discussion about the murals, I didn't want to bring in any extraneous material, so I'm not going to be showing you any other images. The murals are going to be the prime focus, and nothing is going to be allowed to distract from them. The Irish artist James Barry was born in Cork in 1741. After 5.5 years of study on the continent, primarily in Rome, he began work on the murals we see around these walls in 1777 at age 35. He took 7 years, completing them in 1784. But up until his death in 1806, he was to continue to introduce changes both to the paintings and the prints after them. In terms of the Society of Art's patronage, as far as I am aware, this is the first time in the history of art that the owner of an important venue gave an artist complete control over his or her subject matter. In order to secure this extraordinary, indeed unprecedented concession, Barry offered to paint the murals for very little compensation. The society paid only for the canvases, the oil paints, and the artist's use of models. Barry also received the money from two exhibitions, one held in 1783 and the other in 1784, the total for which came to only £503 and 12 shillings. This at a time when Sir Joshua Reynolds was charging 200 guineas for a whole-length portrait. What was the subject matter that was so important to Barry that he thought and received at great personal sacrifice complete freedom in implementing his own vision? His murals, which he entitled A Series of Pictures on Human Culture, form an almost continuous band, 11 feet 10 inches high, around the walls of the great room. The first three paintings depict the progress of Greek civilization, opening with Orpheus, over here, instructing his primitive companions on how to lift themselves out of barbarism. The second mural shows a later agrarian stage of civilization with the Greeks in a pastoral setting celebrating a harvest thanksgiving. These two pictures on the west side wall are 15 feet inches wide, and they prepare the viewer for the grand climax of Greek civilization in a painting showing the victors at Olympia, across here, that extends along the entirety of the north wall for almost 42 feet. The east side wall features two canvases that focus on aspects of contemporary England. The first is an allegorical composition celebrating Britain's global commercial expansion, whereas the second features, and that's here, in an idealized setting, the society's awarding of its prizes. Another almost 42-foot mural stretching across the south wall closes the series with depictions of the elect in Elysium and the damned in Tartarus. The artist fills Elysium with portraits of specific individuals. Thank you. Although he only depicts generalized vices in the much smaller portion of the picture reserved for hell. The murals belong to the genre of history painting, which, as traditionally defined by Renaissance academic theory, was art's highest category. History painting subject matter was drawn from the presumed universal sources of the Bible, classical mythology and history, epic poetry, and the lofty symbols of allegory, all of which were depicted in an idealizing style that transformed common nature. Addressed to the public realm, such heroic and high-minded works were intended to promote public welfare and virtue. To help his audience negotiate his rich and complex narrative, Barry wrote a 221-page book describing its content. Recently, David Allen has offered his own updating of this text by providing helpful keys identifying specific details. But when all is said and done, viewers often have been perplexed by the artist's intent. If truth be told, the subject matter seems disjointed and idiosyncratic in the extreme. From the beginning, no one has quite known how to assess the series' content and purpose. In 1830, the art critic Alan Cunningham cleverly skewered the murals for being irrelevant to British culture. Quote, "But the heathen gods," and you can see some up here, and of course the statue, "but the heathen gods on Barry's canvas appeal to no popular sympathy, to no national belief, to no living superstition. The mob marveled what they meant, and the learned had little to say." In their later survey of British artists, published in 1866, the brothers Richard and Samuel Redgrave were like-minded, deploring the fact that Barry had not chosen a religious subject, having instead pursued a personal program with little to communicate to his intended audience. Quote, Barry, who from his religious opinions and influences and the great admiration he expressed of Raphael and Michelangelo, might have been expected to apply himself to religious art, was led away by classic influences while abroad, and at home by the only opportunity afforded him of exhibiting his powers. He devoted his life to a work on social culture, of which the heathen myths and sports, and here we have examples of that in the victors at Olympia, are made to form the principal groundwork and a half-classic Elysium, the object and end. He toiled on at a work which, if too high for his art power or mental culture, was yet treated in a manner of his own and with little obligation to the inventions of the great painters whom he reverenced. He thus completed an epic in art, unique of its kind, the first and so far the last which his country has produced. The Redgraves gave Barry high marks for originality, but again the result is failure, albeit a bold one. More recent criticism also finds fault with the nature of the attempt. In this telling, the enterprise was doomed from the start because history painting itself was an anachronism in a commercial society. 18th century British culture valued only art that catered to private taste, such as portraiture and landscape, rather than the high-minded rhetoric of the grand style. More interested in private consumption, this society was ill-suited for the transplantation of a continental model based on an elite system of patronage relying on church and state. In his 1995 book, Landscape and Memory, Simon Schama, focusing on the triumph of the Thames, the painting here in the corner, admittedly the series' least successful painting, would also seem to have dismissed the artist's entire enterprise. Quote, while he, Barry, echoed Joshua Reynolds and Winkelmann in asserting the classical maxim that the principal merit of painting as a portrait is its address to the mind, it was precisely in the conceptual department that he fell so woefully short. Schama goes on to assert concerning the Thames that, quote, Barry's failure was as much of the imagination as of technique, unquote. Falling short in the conceptual department and exhibiting a failure of imagination are indeed damning indictments. Those who have praised Barry's endeavors have often concentrated on the nobility of his motives and the extraordinary personal sacrifice that went into his attempt. This theme was struck early and often, and no one stated it better than William Blake. Quote, who will dare to say that polite art is encouraged or either wished or tolerated in a nation where the Society for the Encouragement of Art suffered Barry to give them his labor for nothing? Barry told me that while he did that work, he lived on bread and apples, unquote. In one sense, the greater Barry's failure, the more poignant was his sacrifice. For 230 years, this is how the murals have been viewed. The artist has been praised by some, including me, for the heroic nature of the attempt, and damned by others for the irrelevant nature of his content, which is perceived to be lacking in conceptual rigor. On a personal note, from the very first time I saw these paintings, I felt in my bones that there was far more here than meets the eye. With this in mind, we should turn again to listen more carefully to what the artist had to say in his book that he prepared for the exhibition of his work. This is that 221-page description. Barry insisted that the mural's address to the mind is intended to be difficult and thought-provoking. Quote, it is an absurdity to suppose, as some mechanical artists do, that the art ought to be so trite, so brought down to the understanding of the vulgar, that they who run may read. When the art is solely leveled to the immediate comprehension of the ignorant, the intelligent can find nothing in it, and there will be nothing to improve or to reward the attention even of the ignorant themselves upon a second or third view. In this declamation, the artist's paraphrasing of an Old Testament prophet is revealing. Habakkuk quotes God as telling him, "Write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it." In his murals, Barry, a modern prophet, has written his vision for all to see, but significantly, when he paraphrases Habakkuk, it is to reverse the prophet's meaning. He purposely stands the tradition on its head, arguing for complexity over simplicity. Barry is wedded to a well-established tradition that is the polar opposite of Habakkuk's view. Blake pithily invoked this contrary tradition when replying in 1799 to the Reverend Dr. John Trussler, who had returned with numerous criticisms, the first of the watercolors he had commissioned, quote, and boy, he lets the Reverend have it. "I feel very sorry that your ideas and mine on moral painting," that's history painting, "differ so much as to have made you angry with my method of study. If I am wrong in good company. But you ought to know that what is grand is necessarily obscure to weak men. That which can be made explicit to the idiot is not worth my care. The wisest of the ancients considered what is not too explicit as the fittest for instruction because it rouses the faculties to act. I name Moses, Solomon, Aesop, Homer, Plato." Blake's list of names relies on Old Testament and Greek figures, but it leaves out an important antecedent. Christ himself stands at the head of this tradition. When the disciples asked Jesus why his meaning was not readily apparent, he replied, "Therefore speak I to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand." In pursuing this ancient hermeneutical tradition, Barry is following in Christ's footsteps as well as those of the biblical prophets and the Greek writers and philosophers. Although difficult to discern, there is in these murals a majestic, overarching vision, albeit one that is extremely difficult to uncover, the artist having taken pains to conceal his message, in part because his meaning would have proven intolerable to his patron. The artist was always torn between the desire to reveal his message and the need to conceal it. He relied on the signs and symbols of traditional iconography to lead the attentive viewer to a new understanding. In the case of the first mural, Orpheus, as early as 1842, the perceptive art historian Anna Jamieson remarked on the similarity of Orpheus's pose with that of the traditional iconography for St. John the Baptist. Barry's Orpheus indeed evokes St. John the Baptist, and there is a great deal of similarity between the two men. Both preached in the wilderness, both too were beheaded because of women. In Orpheus's case, the Thracian women decapitated him after tearing him apart, and in John's case, he was beheaded at the behest of Salome and her mother Herodias. In addition, there is the sacrificial lamb in the foreground. The lamb stands for Christ, but it is John who utters the words, "Ecce agnus Dei," behold the Lamb of God, thereby introducing Christ's mission to the world. In the second mural, A Grecian Harvest Home, Barry again invites the viewer to see a deeper Christian narrative. The cluster of images to the left of the circling dancers has numerous elements common to the related scenes of the Nativity and the Holy Family. Here. The infant Christ plays with a bird on a string, a motif with a long iconographic history that alludes to Christ's eventual death and soaring resurrection. The peacock peacock as well appears in countless nativity scenes as a symbol of immortality derived from the legendary belief that the flesh of the peacock does not decay. I could take you over to the National Gallery right now, and there are two Botticelli nativities there. There's the peacock on the shed. As you go around museums around the world, you'll see them again and again and again, and in Italian art, not so much in Northern. The two main deities in this work are Ceres and Bacchus, and the emphasis on them can be seen in a religious context as well. Their gifts to mankind are grain, that is bread, and wine, an allusion to the Eucharist. It is important to recall that the word Eucharist is derived from the Greek word for thanksgiving. In this regard, it refers not only to the consecrated bread and wine, but also to the rite itself, the solemn Thanksgiving celebration, the main subject of Barry's picture. The mural encapsulates both the coming of Christ and the Thanksgiving communion instituted by him at the Last Supper. The pensive, sweet sadness of the dancers shows their sympathetic awareness of the sad fate that awaits the Christ child, the painful sacrifice that must be endured before his final victory over death. The first mural announces the coming of Christ. The second mural introduces the Savior and his sacrifice for mankind. And the third mural, crowning the victors at Olympia, here behind me, shows the establishment of his church. Barry did not invent the connection between Christianity and the Olympic Games. In his first epistle to the Corinthians, the Apostle Paul makes the analogy between pagan contests and the Christian's journey through this world, an analogy that was extended by the early church fathers. Significantly, too, Barry cites Gilbert West's 18th century text on the Olympic Games as his primary source. And in his discussion, West makes an extensive comparison between the Games and the foundations of the Catholic Church, pointing out that the Pope, like the Olympic judges, had the power of excommunication. And you can see those powerful judges seated at the far right. Furthermore, West argued, quote, "Many of the customs and ordinances of the Roman Church allude most evidently to many practiced in the Olympic Stadium, as extreme unction, the palm, and the crown of martyrs." Barry's pensive athletes receiving palms and laurel crowns indeed recall countless depictions of counter-Reformation martyrs who were handed exactly these same symbols. Barry, too, made his own connection between the church and the Olympic Games in his writings, twice pointing out that the truths of God that had protected the territory of the Eleans, where the games were held, permitting all participants to attend in safety regardless of which Greek states might then be at war, was a custom that should be extended to the papal territories. In terms of the Christian narrative, the classical procession is to be seen as a papal progress, with the Pope being carried on the shoulders of the sons of the Church. In so short a summation, I've had to ignore much of the contextual evidence for the Christian meaning underlying this pagan scene. So this really is just to whet your appetite, because I don't know that I can convince you in 25 minutes. But I will mention here one other detail. Frustrated by the public's lack of comprehension, Barry later published a print of the mural's primary motif of Diagoras of Rhodes being carried on his son's shoulders, with a dedication to the papal government in Rome. Despite so blatant an allusion, his audience still remained oblivious to his deeper meaning. The last of the classical subjects, and here across the south wall, Elysium and Tartarus, is based on Book 6 of Virgil's Aeneid, in which Aeneas descends into the underworld. This painting makes clear Barry's primary source for his entire series, the Divine Legation of Moses by William Warburton, Bishop of Gloucester, first published in 2 volumes in 1737 and 1741. Warburton's radical and controversial analysis of Book 6 of Virgil's Aeneid provides not only the primary source for Barry's organizational principles in Elysium, but also the intellectual scaffolding for his classical narrative as a whole. Warburton interpreted Book 6 as having been based on the rituals of the Eleusinian mysteries. These mysteries, which compose the most revered ritual celebration of ancient Greece, were shrouded in secrecy, the initiates having pledged on pain of death not to reveal their secrets. By focusing on Book 6 of the Aeneid as the blueprint for understanding the initiation, Bishop Warburton offered a window into the mysteries' rituals. He argued that these pagan mysteries and those of Christianity are at root one and the same. Both are centered on high-minded communal worship concerned with the profound issues of death and resurrection. As devotional Thanksgiving celebrations, they place each participant in the presence of awe-inspiring divinity. In addition, one of the principal purposes of both the pagan and Christian rituals was to reassure its participants that a blessed immortality awaited that would avoid the horrors of Tartarus or hell in favor of the bliss of Elysium or heaven. For Warburton, the most important commonalities between the mysteries and Christianity were their shared belief in the unity of the Godhead and their shared Neoplatonic vision. Yet Barry, far more than Warburton, would have responded not only to the content, but also to the nature of the ritual presentations. The Eleusinian rites progress through various stages, as is the case with the murals themselves. At Eleusis, dazzling theatrical effects were employed, the rites being held at night in the Temple of Ceres, with initiates plunged into confounding darkness. Kind of getting dark here as well, accompanied by horrific noises and apparitions, eventually to be exposed to bright torchlight or even daylight, with their ordeal climaxing in a beatific vision, as in Barry's concluding mural. Thus, both rites relied heavily on the concept of an initiation involving the presentation and enactment of exalted dramatic narratives, either, as in the case of the Eleusinian mysteries, as theatrical spectacles, or, as in the case of Christianity, as sacred paintings or statuary. In Catholicism, the participation in the liturgy of the Mass was for all believers, but the artist keenly felt that at Christianity's core was, as in the pagan mysteries, a secret wisdom reserved only for a few, one that required a high priest, more specifically a history painter, to impart its message. My book on the murals elaborates on how Barry's series provides an epic pilgrimage in which the viewer is led into a profound transforming experience. Stepping back, one can see that the great room is a sacred space, a recreation of the arcane wisdom to be found in the cella of the Temple of Ceres at Eleusis. To truly see the murals is to experience a rite of passage involving an initiation into both the classical and Christian mysteries. In Orpheus, the pilgrim acquires the knowledge to comprehend and anticipate the coming of Christ. In the second picture, he or she shares in the joy of his birth and in the sorrow of his earthly mission with its sacrifice. In the third painting, the pilgrim participates not only in celebrating the church by acknowledging the Pope as its supreme head, but also in acknowledging the arduous dedication required in the running of life's race, even to the point of martyrdom. Having now acquired in the first three murals the main outlines of the meaning of life from infancy to death, both in terms of the individual's and society's progress, the initiate turns to the two paintings on the east wall, which articulate a contemporary national vision for British society. Tim celebrates an imperialistic economic expansion that, in Barry's telling, will greatly benefit all parties. The pilgrim then views in distribution how native institutions can serve in this grand scheme of achieving a society where the best thinkers and leaders, that is, history painters, are allowed to emerge and be listened to. Finally, Elysium in Tartarus supplies the pilgrim not just with an incentive to follow the right path, but also with an organizational structure of how society should value greatness. Lawgivers form the foundation of a pyramid at whose apex are the creative geniuses. Once we comprehend that the murals embody a Christ-like parable, we see that Barry is offering an epic vision of a transcendent revelation. The murals explain at a deep spiritual level both the individual's and society's meaning and purpose. In addition, the pictures make clear that it is through painting sacred language that one can best access divinity. Protestant iconoclasm had denigrated religious images, but it is the Word made flesh as reflected in the work of the history painter, that alone can truly enlighten. Outside of William Blake, there is no other artist of this period who created such an original and intellectually intricate narrative, and who made such grandiose claims for the role of art and artist. And Barry, unlike Blake, had the opportunity to do this in a major public forum. We can now see that rather than a failed attempt at the grand style, offering little in the way of a coherent message, this series of murals is, in fact, one of the great monuments of the Romantic imagination. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. That's great. I mean, I normally now have 2 or 3 questions, then throw it open, but because the audience is so much more expert than I am, I'll only ask 1 question and then open it out. Do you think it was partly the characteristics of James Barrie himself, his eccentricity and quirkiness, which made it so difficult for people to be open to the possibility that this was a very sophisticated, well thought through piece of work rather than something slightly more kind of random and self-indulgent?
Well, I think, of course, there is the tradition in art that, just as Blake was saying, you do need to rouse the faculties to act and to make it difficult and not all that easy to get down to the deeper level. But you're right, in Barry's case, it's far more than in any other artist that I can think of. I mean, he really had it at a level that it has taken 230 years to sort of puzzle out. It took me a lifetime. But what's interesting...
So just clear, the painting is hard to decipher, but he writes this book, and the book doesn't really help by the sound of things.
Well, the problem is that, because I really think the person he's most like is William Blake. And in fact, I would reverse that. The person that Blake's most like is Barrie. Barrie came first. And Barrie was really Blake's mentor. And, you know, Blake was going to write a huge poem dedicated to Barrie. So he really had locked into the man and his work. And in looking at this, though, and sort of teasing it out over the years, I did it the way that it was meant to be, that Barrie has the iconography. It wasn't reading text. It was looking at the paintings, and things kept popping out. And, oh, yes, I mean, there's a tradition behind this particular figure. And I think what he was doing was that, yes, he was making it difficult. I don't think he had any idea it was going to be as difficult as it was. And of course, Blake never thought that the understanding of his work was as difficult as it was. And that by teasing it out over time, going through it, it is an initiation. You undertake the initiation. And by the time you come out the other end, you're convinced. You're not going to say, take the paintings away, they don't agree with my perception of reality. And one of the problems here, though, the reason I think, too, that it's taken so long, is that with Blake, the surface level, you don't have one. How do you get a hold of Blake? You can't, you start reading this narrative in Theotormon and Urizen, and it just, it's all quite perplexing. And so with Blake, you either get it at this deeper level or you don't get it at all. And Barrie, he's got a very complex and wonderful surface narrative. So I'm not belittling that surface narrative at all. I mean, it's very meaningful, and that's what the book addresses. But we got stuck on the surface narrative, and that alone was sufficient, but it left us scratching our heads. What does it really mean? Because in truth, if you look at it from that point of view, it doesn't hold together. I mean, I think Simon Schama's criticisms are valid until you realize that's not what it's all about, that there is the underlying narrative that's going on at the same time. And it's the hidden meaning that gives it this power. And once you know the hidden meaning, it all locks together. It's very tight. This is not an idiosyncratic, strange arrangement. It does coalesce.
Let's take some comments from the floor. Andrew. Here's the mic.
Andrew Summers. Thank you for unlocking the hidden meaning. But I just wonder, I think you implied to me earlier on anyway, that it needed to stay hidden at the time that Barry did the paintings because it might have been unpalatable. So what was the reaction? Did the RSA know what it was getting when this happened? And how did they react to it? And was there the need to make sure it remained hidden as a meaning rather than being too overt?
Well, they didn't get it at all in terms of the hidden meaning. And as I say, it is unprecedented. What patron is going to allow an artist to come in and paint what he wants without looking over his shoulder and deciding, okay, that this is okay? Because a patron is going to want their aspirations reaffirmed. And Barry is very vague about what he was doing. He wouldn't let people into the great room when he was doing it. He had the key. Even Samuel Moore, the secretary, was not allowed in. And then when it was unveiled, I mean, they took it the way Alan Cunningham, the Redgrave, Simon Schama, I mean, again, this classical narrative, and they accepted the book at face value. And you could say it's successful or unsuccessful, but there's nothing alarming in terms of the content if you're looking at it at that level. And so they just saw it as an example of elite history painting, and that was good for the society, that you're promoting the most exalted genre. But what makes me wonder, too, I mean, there were people at that point in time who knew what the meaning was. It couldn't have been completely hidden from everybody. And it may be because the artist told them. I mean, I just don't think he could have kept that secret for all those years without telling anyone. And I can guarantee you, I have no proof, but I will go on record in saying Blake knew what they meant. And I think Edward Fryer, who wrote the biography, the works of James Barry, was the editor, he knew. And but he kind of hints in his book, but nobody revealed the truth. And had the truth been known, though, they probably would have been torn off the walls and taken away, because I mean it's the apotheosis of the Roman Catholic Church. I mean that was not going to prove acceptable. And the very time that he's painting these, from 1777 to 1784, of course, in 1780, you have the worst riot of the 18th century in England, which is the Gordon riots, and they're anti-Catholic. So it was dangerous to be promoting this.
Yep. Wait for the mic.
Hi, Malcolm Quinn, Chelsea College of Art. You described beautifully this notion of initiation and journey, which counteracts this sort of superficial reading of motifs. But I find it intriguing that you take the journey and you end up with commerce. And is it that what you got here, especially given the role of the RSA, is the problem of finding one's moral compass at the birth of industrial capital, and the complex way that Barry approaches the kind of cleansing you have to go through before you're allowed to see the dirty reality of commerce?
I guess just to add to that, that to modern skeptical eyes, the notion of any kind of relationship between patriotism and religious spirituality seems completely bizarre, you know, but not nearly as strange an idea at that time.
These are anomalies. I mean, they do stand out from everything else that's going on. And I think the explanation, and I'm going to go about this a roundabout way. I mean, we'll get to the heart of that question. But first, to understand that I think Barry was reading Warburton's book in Rome when he was a student there. And that's when the sort of life's ambition formed. And so when he actually first undertook it in this room, the Olympic Games was going to be half the room. It was so important, and again, the Catholic Church, and there was going to be the Christ figure over here introducing that, and we still have the Elysium and Tartarus, which goes right back to Virgil and Warburton's interpretation of Virgil. So then when he got the specific venue of the Royal Society of Arts, and he knew this is where he was going to do it, then these two modern subjects came in, but they would not have been part of the original conception. So they always were kind of an add-on to the four tight classical themes. And if you notice, the revelation came to him in working with Raphael. And it was the stanza in the Vatican. And you can find figures. I mean, this is the Pope here, Julius II, on the shoulders with the great big beard and so on. I mean, they're coming in. There are just so many echoes of the Raphael. And he talks about the Raphael in his narrative. And so that was at the core. One interesting thing, too, is, of course, what distinguishes the main room, the stanza della signatura of the Raphael, is that everything is symmetrical. I mean, think of the Disputati, right there down the center, all the main focuses and everything. The philosophers, you've got the two, and and then coming around. Everything in Barry is off-center. And the time's out of joint. We got to get back to that. But we come around, and it is reading from left to right. And then you get to this corner, and then bam! I mean, they don't fit, and he doesn't want them to fit. And we now switch, and we go from right to left. And so the modern world collides. And what he's really saying is that this is what the ideal society looks like. And this is a society that's based on merit, where the elite and the wealthy can't control things. It's all out in the open. And this is not just about athletes, and there's a virtue and the contests, which are religious in nature, of course. But also you've got philosophers and playwrights and artists and all these others that are being recognized at the Olympic Games as well. And the only place that the modern world surpasses the classical world, commerce, navigation. I mean, you've got all these developments, and the classical world they had commercial trade routes and so on, but the modern world has, the battle of the ancient and the moderns, that's always one of the things that's pulled out. And so in Barry's telling, though, this is really an image of peace, the Pax Britannia, and that he's commerce and the spreading of British commerce is going to make everybody better off. The black slave and manacles at the far left corner. It's unrealistic. He has a totally naive view of what the potentials of commerce, but he sees it as a moral good. And then in the distribution of premiums of the society, it's this kind of institution on a lesser scale, again, awarding talent that reflects what we have here. Plus, another thing, though, that's different about the modern world, the 18th century world, from the classical world, is the importance of women. And there's not a woman in this scene. Well, I think there's one over here who slipped in, but that's another issue. But this is a male society, as is the Catholic Church. The hierarchy is male. But now the importance of women is that, again, there's no real center there, but it's women who are helping to, it's patronizing, but a very common 18th century view that they help to smooth the way for male aggression and all this competition. And it's that competition and the running of the race and so on that will lead to excellence, but we do need the softening influence of women. And this, by the way, as in Virgil, in our initiation, and so we finally get to the end here. Aeneas goes down into hell, and then there are two gates by which you come back. There's the gate of horn and the gate of ivory. And the gate of horn is the true gate. So when you pass through that, you really pass to eternity. The gate of ivory is false, and it's a gate of dreams. And what it really is, according to Warburton, and I think he has some brilliant ideas, but it's the gate of the temple, the ivory door. And you go through that, and it's a dream in that it's not permanent. So we can experience this initiation, and we can leave here and go out into the world, and we're not dead. When we go through the gate of horn, you're going to experience this too, but for there, it's for keeps. You don't get to come back. So I mean, he's thought it through. It's there. And by the way, he is encouraging us to be serious about this, because if you look, the entrance and the exit, you go under that judging angel, and the scales tip into hell, into Tartarus. So better shape up.
Because we're running out of time, what I'll do is take 2 or 3 questions together, if that's right, but then ask you to kind of to deal with them. So, Susan? Wait.
Yeah.
Hello, Bill. David Allen sends his apologies. He really wanted to be here tonight, but ill health precluded him. I just wanted to ask myself, was the fact the society laid his body in state in this room before he was buried in St. Paul's, was that sort of like the final coda of the paintings, do you think? You know, sort of a nice symmetry.
Hold on to that thought. Hold on to that question. What other? Yep.
A very brief technical question. Have these paintings faded and changed colour and darkened since they were painted? When they were painted, were they very, very much brighter and more vivid? And if the answer is yes, is there any chance of the RSA restoring them?
And then any other? Yeah, and then all the questions are coming from this table. That's fine.
We've got 2 portraits of the first and second president. Did Barry know that he was going to have to work with those, or do we know whether he was rather cross that his cycle would be interrupted by bigwigs? And do we know whether he had an alternative use in his own dream cycle? What would have been had those portraits been excluded?
Great. I'm actually having my portrait put up there, but that's not so. It's just going to the trustee board. Okay, so yeah, sorry.
You may need to help me in recalling them all, but
So
take
the
first
body lying in state?
The body was lying in state by candlelight, and I think, yes, the flickering and the candles, that it would have been magical. I mean, it would have been a better way to have seen it than we normally do. And sort of in the sacred rites, some people think that the kaiki and the beverage that they drank in the mysteries had hallucinogenic properties, and so I think by candlelight and all that, it could have been interesting. Yeah.
And then the second one was about, I think, well, there's a question about the Romney and Folkestone paintings. They were there, presumably. They were there before he. Tell us about the story.
Right. So there were fireplaces at either end of the original room. And when Barry made his proposal to the society and it was accepted, they already had in place the portraits over the fireplaces. And so he did have to work around those. Now, he had proposed that they be removed. He wanted a continuous band, and he wanted portraits of the king and the queen to go into those positions that also had narratives in them that had to do with his brave new world. And later on, because that failed, and later on in 1798, 1801, he wanted to replace them with the Act of Union, an Irish theme in what was going on in Ireland, and that also failed, so he was frustrated. I just should point out, though, while you bring up the portraits, that it's unfortunate that over time they got swapped. And this one of Lord Romney should be over here, and the reason, too, that it's so important that before too long, we're going to swap. Maybe tonight we can, if you get a ladder. But Lord Romney is in Barry's painting. You've got the Prince of Wales is standing on a bale of cotton, and then that wonderful figure in red with the hat on. He's wearing a hat because he had been a former president, now dead, but it's so beautifully painted, and Barry wanted you to make that contrast between Reynolds's not-so-good portrait and his brilliant one. And I've always thought that a decorator came in and saw in the Gainsborough the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, and you've got the dome over there in Barry's painting, and so it was a decorator's decision to swap them, but they really do need to go back. And then what was the third question?
How much colour has been lost, and what would happen if what would happen if people were to put their hands in their pockets tonight in order to pay for a restoration fund?
Well, I'm all for raising more money in funds, but the RSA has been very responsible, and they were recently cleaned by a Bristol firm. And I think that what we really do need, though, is more light on them, the ability to bring them out. And I just will give you one teaser, because I think it happened in the 1980s before Matthew, so no criticism to him here, but a man worked on them, a conservator, in the room. Two of the figures in the painting are missing. So he made some decision that these shouldn't stay in, and what I think he did, though, was overpaint them. Barry himself made changes to the murals over time, and I think the guy got in and saw that these images were painted on top of the original paint surface. I think Pentimenti was coming through and thought they were weak, and took it upon himself to blot them out. But if that coloring is removed, they're still there. Yeah, they're I can point out.
There is a story of restorations of paintings in the journal. The RSA journal has been reported the various stages of restoration.
Oh, okay. Let's see if I can. It's kind of weak, but wow, that light has got me blinded.
Can we go back to the other way of lighting the room? Is that?
Yes, thank you.
No.
That's Shakespeare.
That's it.
And then you've got Spencer, and there was a head here, and I think there still is, but it got covered. It's minor. You've then had Barry with this wonderful angel here. He put a head between the wing and that head, and at the same time he put another head right here between the wing and the head of the main angel, and that's now gone too.
I mean, that was kind of just to finish, but I mean, it's an amazing picture, and I love this room, and it's fantastic to understand this better. But I suppose if as a layperson, the kind of criticism is it does sometimes feel as though he's just throwing head after head, face after face, person after person. Some of these people here seem to be kind of standing in a ditch, which I've never really quite understood. So, was there a sense in which, as a painter, if one has a criticism of him, it was that he wanted to keep adding more and more and more, and in some senses that detracted in some senses from the coherence of the overall?
Well, it's the meaning of life, and it's an encyclopedia, and so yes, as times went on, that he kept wanting to, this figure, Moses Mendelssohn, had to come in, and Sir Joshua Reynolds died, he's got to come in, and so yeah, he's adjusting. But this ditch over here, I think that's sort of a reference to Plato's cave, and so every decision of who's in there too, there's a meaning underlying it, and if you start, this is really addressed, it's classical subject matter, but it's addressed to the British nation, and you can read this too as British civilization, and you go around in one series, there are a number of series I think that are going on here as you can read it. And just now I'm digressing, but stylistically the paintings change. Each is a very different stage. He doesn't want you to have an easy go. You've got to take it sort of step by step and make this pilgrimage as you go around. But they're overwhelmingly Catholic, the choice of figures there. And again, he got so frustrated with some of it that one of the great legislators is William Penn, here showing to Solon his,
Thank you.
yeah, much better. So Penn is a Quaker. Barry, again, because, thinking, wishing will make it true, but he really saw very little difference between Quakerism and Roman Catholicism. But he got frustrated enough that when he did the print detail of that, he pushed Penn into the background and he put Lord Baltimore as the bringer of truth, justice, and liberty and all those good things and religious freedom to America. And of course, Lord Baltimore is Maryland, and being from the University of Maryland, I can't complain about that. But he's always pushing the Catholics to the fore.
So, Bill, that was fantastic. I will explore what would be involved in swapping over the paintings. And if we ever do it, we'll invite you back. And you can unveil them in their true place. I think that's the very least that we can do for you. It's been a fantastic talk and some great questions. Please, there seems to be more wine in the room, so please stay and mingle. I'm sure, Bill, you'll be able to stay around for a while.
Yes.
I hope you've all got strong muscles, because you can't possibly leave without getting a copy of Bill's book, which seems to me to be amazingly priced at £30, worth 10 times as much, I'd say. And I'm sure you'll sign it for people, Bill. You'd be happy to, and that's available outside. It really is an incredibly beautiful book, a wonderful Christmas present for yourself or anybody else. So do make sure that you don't leave empty-handed. If it's too heavy to carry home, I'm sure you can buy it online, although it would be more expensive, I think. So tonight's the time to get it. So thank you, Bill. Thank all of you. Carry on, enjoy yourself. But most of all, can I just ask you again to thank Bill Presley.